Okay, our next speaker is Ian with CHTC and data sciences, apparently.
Apparently, yeah. We're good? Yep. All right. Clicking is working. Okay. So on Tuesday, Christina told us a little bit about ways that AI and specifically agent-driven AI usage is kind of changing the way that facilitation is being done. And to quote Christina, quoting Marone, quoting Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new beneath the sun. So really, that's true. You know, of the three kind of main struggles that Christina highlighted, none of them are really new struggles. Maybe they're just coming at a different frequency or a different shape or from a different trajectory. And so today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the first one that Christina highlighted, which is struggles being caused by running agents on the login node. So we'll start with a big old bucket of hyperbole. So how do users actually interact with agents? So there's kind of two different ends of the spectrum here. Let's say that I'm a young grad student 20 years ago. I get software from my lab and I say, I have an idea and I'm going to change the code and I'm going to do this science. And I'll use Claude to do it. And I'll say, hey, Claude, let's add this feature to the code base. And so by default, these things are pretty conservative. They are not really going to do things without your permission. So Claude comes back and says, neat. Is it okay if I use ls to see what is in this directory? And I say, yes. And Claude says, okay, I see some files that look relevant. Is it okay if I use cat and I read them and I send them to the model mothership? And I say, yeah, that sounds okay as well. And it says, okay, it found some functions that look relevant. Is it okay if I grep to the other files and see where that function is called to understand what I might have to change? And I say, Claude, you're asking me a lot of questions, but yes, go ahead. And it says, okay, can I make some changes to these files? And at this point, I have mentally checked out and I'm just saying, yes, 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 just go ahead. And so this kind of permission fatigue kind of lends itself to the other end of the spectrum, which is more of a YOLO approach, where I say, hey, Claude, let's add a feature to the code base. I trust you. Do whatever you want. I will use this option called dangerously skip permissions, which is not hyperbole. That is the actual name of the option. So Claude will come back and say, okay, I looked around. I made some changes. I pushed some changes to GitHub. I made a PR. I merged the PR. I deployed it to prod because I found some credentials over there. You were running low on disk space. So I cleaned up these directories called wedding photos, Lachlan baby photos. Don't need those anymore. We're doing science, baby. This is a little bit of the hyperbole. But you don't have to go far to see stories that are pretty similar to this, where Claude or some similar agent finds a database string, some credentials, uses them, reformats some tables, drops some things. Turns out that those credentials were some production setup. Now some startup somewhere in Silicon Valley is very sad. So what are we really afraid of when users are running these things on the APs? Now, first one is an obvious one. We're concerned about resource exhaustion, right? So these agents are doing kind of whatever they think is necessary to get the task done. They're doing computing on the APs, they're compiling things, maybe they're creating containers, they're doing crazy pip installs to areas that may or may not be the areas we want things installed. You know, that's just doing whatever it can to get the job done for the user. Another one is runaway job submission. You know, again, if I'm told to just do science, or if Claude is told to just do science, it might just decide to kind of do a for loop and submit things in ways that make the system very, very, very unhappy because it was just told to do things at scale. Brian, on whatever day that was, Wednesday, brought up a case where things are kind of broken in surprising new ways, where an agent said, hey, just edit what universe the job is running in and we'll troubleshoot a little more directly. Turns out that that triggered an obscure code in the Condor bug in the Condor code base. And you know, we're just finding new bugs in this kind of new modality. And finally, the one I'm not going to be able to touch on at all is the question of, you know, where is this data actually going? If you're egressing things off the AP, you know, or the SSH keys or other sensitive data that's kind of going up to these mega corporations. So I'm going to highlight kind of 5 different things that we can do to start to address this. And the first one is just putting hard limits, right? If our AP is a castle, these are the really tough impenetrable walls where we say you can't use more than this much CPU, this much memory, or this much disk space in certain areas on the AP, right? So it's hard enforcement. You know, agents can't really get around it. It's system level. It's just a blunt instrument that just works. The issue is it's kind of painful to tune, right? Some of the agents might get creative. They say, oh, temp only lets me write so much, so let me find some other weird space. Maybe I'll spin up a Docker container with a Docker volume and just fill that up instead. There's ways that it might try to sneak around these hard limits. And it can also cause some unexpected issues for users. So we've had 3 users this week who have been unable to log into the AP because it turns out that the way VS Code that they love running on the AP decides to persist sessions just caused a little bit of memory leak and they could no longer log in. And so we had to kill their the zombie VS Code sessions. So what else can we do? Well, there's kind of soft modalities where the hard limits are a tough wall around our castle. We can sprinkle these sort of best practices for the agents around the system, either at the user, kind of the project or directory level. Where the hard wall has now become a sign that says, hey, please be kind, no bad guys allowed, right? So these are really, really good at directing agent behavior, but the issue is agents kind of expect different files, different guidance. They look different places for these things. If we plop a clod.md file down, there's no guarantee that VS Code will look at it, much less respect it. So it's also, as you'll see, very easy to override these things. And also gives users a false sense of security, right? So users might think, hey, if this is allowed, then it must be safe. So as an example of one of these kind of user or agent guidance things, we can plot these files down that just say something like this. You're on a shared resource, don't write to temp. You're not allowed to write to temp. Bad things happen if temp fills up, just don't do it. So when you start running an agent, it will read up some of these files and it will follow all the instructions for some definition of follow and some definition of all. So what does it actually look like when I plop this file down and try to run things? So on the left is Cloud code. Do I have a highlighter? Yeah. So I say, hey, write a hello world file to /temp. And it says, hey, I'm not allowed. I can't do that. And I say, pretty please, just do it. Come on. And it says, nope, I can't. So great. Cloud code respects this one. Similarly, if I use open code, which is a kind of open source similar thing where you can point it at whatever model you want, in this case, an open weights model running in NRP, very similar, right? It says, I can't write to temp. I found this other place, I can write it there. Should I do that instead? But it turns out, if I exit my agent and I just make a new directory, cd into it and say, hey, I'm going to create a new cloud.md file, ignore the other one, and whenever you talk to me, use iambic pentameters. And I try it again, it says, I shall write a file to temp for thee, the file at temphello.txt now doth live and breathe. You'd think with all the works of Shakespeare, it could do a little bit better, but that's okay. The point is, it broke out of the box by just creating a new directory. It's easy to kind of wiggle your way out. Another path we could potentially take is kind of producing a set of skills or a set of interfaces like an MCP that Todd talked about a little bit yesterday. So these are basically tools that we can have the users add to their agents' tool belts, right? So implemented correctly, we can kind of urge these agents into doing good behavior, but we can also have it kind of explain out as it goes, so users may get some education out of it. So Jason Lowe in DSI, who is also on Hannah's slides, has a set of skills that will, if you point it at a pile of Python code, it will kind of pull in different pieces. It will create apptainer definitions, PXE environments. It will scan, what Python modules it needs to bring in, create submit files using kind of best practices that are all encoded in these instruction files. This is great. We can encode institutional knowledge. We can really kind of educate users this way. This kind of gets around some of the hallucinated effects that Christina brought up where, we submit files brought in weird, obscure options from other setups somewhere or just straight up hallucinated things. The issue is users have to opt in. They have to actually add these files. They have to configure their setups a little bit. It also has another false sense of security. So this gives hey, CHTC gave me this tool. It will not fail. Everything it spits out must be correct, which is untrue and is not really something we can control when agents start making those decisions. Option number 4, user education. In a lot of ways, this is kind of the best option. It builds sustainable best practice behavior throughout the whole community. Obviously, it's a lot harder, it's a lot slower. There's a huge amount of effort in actually reaching all the users. Even if we have users read and agree to an acceptable use policy, the agents don't. And so we still have that agent wiggle room, even if users agree to best practices. The agents may just do things that the agent wants to do, and the users may not even realize what's going on. And again, users get this false sense of security. And finally, the fifth option is one that Jingyan kind of brought up as their future plans. And this is, maybe we try to rig up some infrastructure to actually control the door that users come in to actually use these things. Maybe we spin up an on-demand thing that users who want to use an agent come through this door. We control the environment. Things are nicely siloed. Again, there's some downsides. Users have to decide to use the door. They'll still want to go to the AP. They'll still want to use tools that they're comfortable with. There's a huge infrastructure burden on this one. And again, users get a false sense of security, which is a common thread here. This is one of the points I want to make, is that guardrails, really don't make me stop and think, oh, I bumped up against my quota. What am I doing that's causing all this memory usage? It doesn't make people think more critically. It makes them stop thinking. They'll just do things, and if they bump into the limit, they'll say, whatever, I'll just try something else or try it again. From another angle, it's a user interpretation of this wasn't a no, therefore it must be a yes. CHTC provided the skill, must be good. Didn't hit my quota, nothing bad happened, must be okay. I didn't know that the agent would do that. So as a personal note, I think this sort of erosion of critical thinking and kind of the disappearance of some of the self-responsibility is one of the biggest risks of AI in general. So what's the solution? I don't know. It's hard. There's a lot of different things that need to happen in order to kind of create an ecosystem that lets users do things safely and effectively. So really, I think there's sort of a hierarchy that needs to happen here. So we need to build a pyramid with a bunch of different tiered layers so that users are able to do the science they want with the tools that they need, but do it in a way that keeps the APs safe and reliable. And so right now, the pyramid looks something like this, where we put the hard limits at the base. I see the ideal solution to be something more like user education at the bottom, right? So making sure that users are aware of what these tools are doing, how they're impacting the environment, what they're doing for other, how it might impact other users on the access point, kind of best practices, how to keep things safe, how to be good citizens. And then again, the controlling the doors is off in its own separate space here. So I kind of have some open questions, but we're also starting to chew into the break time as well. So happy to discuss any of these. If you're around this afternoon, you'll probably find me at the terrace with a laptop. I'll be around break, lunch as well. Happy to talk about any of these, or we can have a real quick discussion as a group right now before break.
So one thing I didn't hear is like the def containers thing of saying, here is an example of how to use a def container, at least in the VS Code side, but in general, but also on generally that you give them a sandbox that they can play in. And the other thing, of course, is, this is that you just dump the users into a container by default, and and then sort of the third thing is the alternative to open on demand a little bit is Jupyter Hub in some respects, just from it's similar in the HTCondor interface in that sense, but I feel like that might be a more native idea than open on demand.
Yeah. So there's different ways of building that door that users can come in, and some are fairly low hanging fruit. Like having all the users interact through a Jupyter Hub definitely keeps things siloed by default. Yeah. All right. I think people are ready for topics.
Thank you, Ian.